Hey everybody, Tim from For All Mankind here to give you my first build guide on Diablo 4. So I play as a rogue. I've been using this same build essentially throughout the whole game. It's not a Twisting Blades build. I'm calling it Shadow Flurry. You'll kind of see why it's called that here in a bit. But essentially, the objective is I take one enemy who I make vulnerable right away, use Flurry, which makes everybody around me vulnerable, and then I pop them all with Shadow Imbuement. They all kind of explode. You get a nice boom, boom explosion. Everything dies, and it's great for mobbing. I also do use rapid fire, and I do have poison imbuement leveled up for bosses specifically, but that's kind of the gist of how it is. I'm going to show you the build, show you the aspect that I think is the most important to it. The nice thing about this build in general is aside from one aspect, I think you can really do what you want with everything else. So it's very low requirements, plus that aspect is something that you can get from the codex itself, so you don't even have to hope to find it. So without further ado, let's get into the build. All right, on to the skill tree and the abilities that we are using. Firstly, I use Puncture. I use Puncture for one reason, this perk right here. Now, instead of throwing one blade, you will throw three, but if you hit your target with two, it applies vulnerability. This is an up-close build, so odds are you're going to apply vulnerability almost every time. So that's the core, that's your basic skill that we're going to be using here. You can also use something like Forceful Arrow, because Forceful Arrow also can do vulnerability after the third cast, but I find this just works out better personally. Rapid Fire, which I know the build isn't around Rapid Fire, but Rapid Fire is something we do place 5 points in. We do that because we want to get improved Rapid Fire, plus it's great for single target damage. If you put Poison Imbuement on Rapid Fire, you will start melting bosses extremely quickly, so that is our boss killing skill that we have there. I use Improved Rapid Fire for the resource generation that it can add to the build. Later on, like where I'm at currently, it's probably not as necessary. I might wind up switching it to Advanced Rapid Fire, but for now, we're keeping on Improved Rapid Fire. Now, the main core skill of this build is going to be Flurry. Flurry unleashes a flurry of stabs and a slashing strike in enemies in front of you. That will change though with an aspect. We'll go over that. 4 times and dealing a total of said damage. Now we are going with Flurry because of this perk right here, Improved Flurry. If Flurry hits a vulnerable enemy, it will make all enemies hit by this cast vulnerable for 3 seconds. Now that is very good. The reason this is very good though is there is an aspect that you can get, which we'll show off when we get to the items that I'm using, that turns it into, instead of just a cone in front of you, a full circle. So as long as you're in the meat and potatoes of the fight and you just go right in there, you hit somebody with your Puncture, then you cast Flurry, all of a sudden, boom, everybody's vulnerable and you're just going to do a shit ton of damage. So that is why we are going Flurry. This is one of the reasons I call it my Shadow Flurry build. After that, realistically, you can go any agility skill you want. I do prefer Dash. I think Dash is the fail-safe. This has gotten me out of some sticky situations more often than anything else I've tried, so that's why I'm going with Dash. I've tried the traps, but I never had a whole lot of success with them, to be honest with you. So I use Dash, but again, realistically, whatever you want to do there. And if you feel comfortable not even using an agility skill, this can be foregone, but I always like being a squishy, vulnerable rogue. I like having some kind of escape. So that's why I went with Dash. I don't use any of the poison traps. I don't use any of the dark shrouds. I don't use any of these abilities here. The only reason I have any points into this skill line is because of I put 1 point in exploit, and we are putting 3 points in malice. We do this for the, again, vulnerable damage. This build is all about making your target vulnerable and adding that Shadow Imbuement onto them. So 3% more damage to vulnerable enemies. It's just going to be nice because everybody's going to be vulnerable. You're going to make pretty much anybody you fight vulnerable the whole time. Going to the imbuements now, I have put 5 points into Shadow Imbuement. I have put 5 points into Poison Imbuement. You'll notice I have them ranked 9. That is due to some items. These items are not a necessity, but you know, again, it's nice to have those extra perks. This will be our #1 imbuement that we're going to be using most of the time. The only time we switched Poison is when we're going up against bosses. Now, I'll talk about this just very briefly, but Poison, we go up this tree here. Critical strikes with Poison Imbuement skill deal 75% increased poisoning damage. You're going to crit a lot just because of how many attacks you're going to get off between Flurry and Rapid Fire, that this winds up being pretty useful, especially again against bosses with Rapid Fire. Now, aside from that, again, Shadow Imbuement being my primary resource, you're going to use this. You're going to go up this skill tree here. Now, I've gone up this part strictly due to the vulnerability. Shadow Imbuement's primary explosion makes enemies vulnerable. So when you make that first cast and you explode that first bit of enemies, that explosion itself will make more surrounding enemies vulnerable. You will have the whole field vulnerable by the time your combo gets done. It is super nice, not only for you, but for your party as well. You could go this way. I've tried it. It's okay, but personally, I found this to be way more useful. We do get both 3 points into Shadow Crash and 3 points into Consuming the Shadows. Shadow Crash is nice because you can make, you have a 10% chance of stunning an enemy for 1.5 seconds. So, you know, a little bit of CC never hurt anybody. And this is extremely useful. This is one of the reasons why I think the perk I've went with Rapid Fire has become less relevant, because each time you kill an enemy with shadow damage using Consuming Shadows, you generate 30 energy. So because of this, and because I'm going in there just spamming my flurries and every once in a while Rapid Fire for the single target damage, this winds up getting the resource back to where I very rarely have resource management issues. Not that it never happens, it does, but as long as you're paying attention and you know you do your resource management okay, using this will probably net you a really good positive on that, to where you don't have to worry so much about, you know, making sure you don't have any energy. Aside from that, I am personally using Rain of Arrows. I don't think this is a necessity per se, but I find it super useful because, one, your imbuement skill, which again will be shadow most of the time, gets applied on just a giant field of enemies from the get-go. If you see a ton of mobs coming at you, you throw this on there, everybody's got shadow imbuement, you get in there, you explode them, everybody's vulnerable. It's super, well, it's nice, but it's super just cool to see everybody exploding because of this one ability. And of course, you come down here, the second wave gives you a super nice CC, 3 seconds of all the enemies except for major bosses onto the ground. Gives you time to get in there, flurry it up, blow everything up before they even can stand up. So super nice. Now, I started using Victimize. I think Victimize makes sense for the build, right? Dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy, which they are going to be vulnerable, has up to a 30% chance to cause a mini explosion, dealing 23% of the original damage to the surrounding enemies. This is a nice ability. You don't really see the explosion, I'll be honest. For the longest time, I didn't even know if it was working. It is. I've seen it, and one of the other ways I know it's working is I have an aspect that when using Victimize, this explosion actually heals you. So it actually, this mixed with this other aspect has given me a decent amount of lifesteal that I didn't have prior. But that is the skills that I'm using. Those are the abilities that I'm using. We're going to now switch over to the character, the items, and take a look at that. Again, there's only really one aspect that is super important to the build. Everything else is just a nice cherry on top. I'll go over them though, just so you can see what I'm running. So one moment, we'll go over there. Okay, on to the items. But before I hit onto the items, I just want to go over our specialization. We are using the combo points. You're going to see some items here that utilize combo points. We're doing this specifically because I find the damage output you get from this more rewarding than the other two. Honestly, I've used this. I didn't like it. I felt like every time it procced, it was in a situation where I didn't need it. So there's times where it just wasn't useful, where I've never had an issue with combo points in that aspect of things. So just wanted to give clarification that that is a specialization we are going. Most important aspect currently I have on my ring is the Flurry one. So it's a Codex one. You can just go find it from a dungeon, so you don't have to worry about it being a random drop. You can just find it. But it makes our Flurry in a circle versus just a cone, which makes this build extraordinarily more viable than without it. Because now, instead of us just hitting these people and making them vulnerable, we're making everybody around us vulnerable. We're imbuing everybody around us with shadow damage, which means more explosions, which more explosions leads to more vulnerable enemies, which this build is very much about making things vulnerable and exploding them, right? So this is probably the key one you need to grab. And the nice thing is you can grab it early. This is another one that's really good. It's specifically for Rain of Arrows, but it imbues our Rain of Arrows with every aspect, or with every imbuement, right? So we get Poison, we get Frost, and we get Shadow all in one. Does a good amount of damage. Everybody's taking damage. Everyone's CC'd. So this is one of the reasons I also use my Rain of Arrows. Other ones that note out, like this is nice. You get a little Rain of Arrows, small little like Rain of Arrows at a target location. It does a decent amount of damage. This one is the big one that is a unique item. It's my first unique item, but this is the one that goes hand in hand with our combo points, because it makes our combo points, our abilities, our core abilities, do more damage when we're spending 3 combo points. It also has a chance to proc 3 combo points instantly. So if you pay attention down here, you might not have to worry about attack speed 1, attack speed 2, attack speed 3. You know, it's just boom, 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 and you go. My rotation for bosses tends to be get in there, get your 3 combo points, Flurry, 3 combo points, Rapid Fire, 3 combo points, Rapid Fire. I do that way because Flurry gives you a 45% attack speed boost when you have all three. So you can tend to get that second rapid fire in there before your attack speed slows down. That tends to be the rotation for bosses primarily. Other than that, it's just a lot of flurrying and rapid firing when needed. Flurry is what's going to really blow everything up, though. Explosions from Victimize, which is that key passive that I'm using, will heal you now. This is where I noticed the explosions happening the most because my health bar would be almost gone, and all of a sudden it goes back up because those explosions start proccing, we start getting healed. This is the lifesteal element of this current build. Again, not a necessity, but super nice because we are squishy, right? This one makes a Shadow Clone as long as you're attacking damaging vulnerable targets, which we will be doing with both Marksman and Cutthroat. So again, super nice, unique item to have. A necessity, no, but more DPS. Then everything else is just kind of extra stuff. This game's a little bit more tankier. This makes it to where you get a little bit more CC. You can daze vulnerable targets. So that, in general, is the items that I am using. Again, the only important, like the most important one is this. There are some other nice add-ons that I do have here, but that's the one that really sets this build apart and makes it actually work very well. You can see if you go to stats, our damage to vulnerable targets is 142%, where it starts off normally at 20%, right? So we're gaining an extra 122%, not only from some of our Paragon points, but just items in general. So doing that much damage to vulnerable targets, which the targets will be vulnerable almost the whole time, is where you're going to see most of the damage come from. So that's the build. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys find it useful. There are some changes. There are some things you can do your own. You can make it instead of Shadow, you can go Frost with the same concept. You can do a Frost Flurry. Same exact concept. The difference being you're going to have more CC. I just like the explosions from this. So that's why I went with Shadow over Frost. But the CC is nice, and there are items that do proc well with chilled with chilled enemies. So hopefully this got you guys something. It's not a Twisted Blade build. It is something different. It's a lot of explosions. It's a lot of fun. You get in there and just start slamming flurries on enemies, watching everything pop, rapid fire bosses down super quick with poison. It works tremendously well. I am world tier 3. I am 61, getting ready to head into world tier 4. So that's it. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to end the video with some gameplay so you can kind of see it in action. But until next time, you guys have a great one. Thanks all.